All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, right now, the media and the political class is obsessed, not with the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, not with the destitution that so many Americans face at this time, but instead with a story that allegedly occurred 30 months ago in which President Trump allegedly called dead war heroes losers and suckers and refused to fly to a cemetery for an American World War I dead during a state visit to Paris in 2018 because he was worried about getting his hair messed up. Now, immediately, my neocon radar went off. This story happened 30 months ago. It's dropping now. The sourcing on the story is incredibly vague, alleging that 4 anonymous sources quoting the president saying monstrous things about troops, and the timing of it all just didn't really make a lot of sense. More so, the story on closer examination begins to quickly fall apart, and the more I look into the circumstances around it, I see it as one of the most successful episodes of manufacturing consent in recent months, with grave consequences for the strength of the Pentagon war machine here in the United States. Let's start with the most salacious part of that story. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, he writes that Trump canceled a visit to honor American war dead during that visit to France because he didn't want his hair messed up in the bad weather. Why should I go to that cemetery if it's filled with losers, he allegedly said. Now, that's terrible. Frankly believable, given what he said in some of the past about John McCain. And a slew of Trump aides who were actually there when Trump supposedly made the comments, though, have come out. They've denied that report, including people like John Bolton, who absolutely want him to lose and would have included such an anecdote in his book to sell more copies if he could have. And look, given their track record, we probably shouldn't believe any of them. But look deeper, and even liberal Jason Leopold at BuzzFeed cast doubt on that tale, given the documents that he obtained earlier showing that the U.S. military is actually the one that canceled the trip because of bad weather. Now, could they all be lying? Maybe. Frankly, it's not even really the most important part of the story. The most important part, in my view, is how we're all glossing over the obvious political and economic benefits that this story has for the very worst people in Washington. As I mentioned, the author of this story is The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg. That matters a lot. Why? Well, Goldberg has long been a tool of the national security state, an aide pushing for war with Iran, war in Syria, and war in Iraq. Don't take my word for it. Take Glenn Greenwald's, who as usual has the receipts, and lays out Goldberg's long history of agitating for war, making the case for the invasion of Iraq, and how Goldberg himself is most responsible for manufacturing the lie that Saddam Hussein was in league with al-Qaeda to perpetuate the 9/11 attacks and laid the groundwork for public support for the invasion. Why am I even making this about Goldberg? Well, he's the only publicly identifiable person in this story. Goldberg's sources were all anonymous, not because they fear for their lives, but because they fear for tweets. That's literally the reason that Goldberg gave in a recent CNN appearance.
Well, like you, when you're faced with the same situation, you always ask for people to go on the record.
Sure.
And then ultimately you have to make it when they don't want to go. And we've both experienced why people don't want to go. They don't want to be inundated with angry tweets and all the rest. And we push hard, and that's why you have to sort of do this reporting with even more belt and suspenders approach.
So we have a dubious story pushed by a notorious errand boy for the deep state and by cowardly members of the national security bureaucracy. Why? Why now? 2 answers. Both of them have to do with perpetuating the war in Afghanistan. On the very same day that Goldberg dropped his story, hours earlier, the Trump administration appointed Will Ruger to be the next U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, who happens to be the first nominee to that country, which has called for a total and complete withdrawal of U.S. forces. Interesting, right? Even more interesting, literally hours after the story dropped from The Atlantic, an advertisement was ready from a group called Vote Vets, which debuted on MSNBC's Morning Joe, describing Trump's so-called comments. Vote Vets claims they had no heads up about the story, and they worked throughout the night to produce the ad. To which I say, interesting timing. What was worse than all of that, though, was the behavior of the so-called journalists. Biden emerged from the basement for an emergency press conference where, I kid you not, the very first question was from a staff writer for The Atlantic, and where a journalist asked what that story tells Biden about Trump's soul. The best question was from CBS News' Ed O'Keefe, who actually asked Biden why he wasn't more angry about Trump's remarks. So again, let's trace the roots of this entire controversy. We have a highly dubious story, anonymously sourced in The Atlantic, dropped from a reporter with a long record of flacking for the war machine, which is then accepted hook, line, and sinker by the media, who feed it to the Biden campaign and associated apparatuses to manufacture a news cycle designed to get the president out of office. Millions of dollars will be fundraised off of it. Nobody of actual stature will actually question it. And more importantly than anything else, if Joe Biden wins the presidency, he owes these people a lot. After all, they went to all-out war with their own president to ensure he gets elected. Why? Not because they care about his character, but because they care about the policies that he will have to continue. They care about the fact that he will not pursue a withdrawal from Afghanistan and will empower the Obama-era neocons who were crested into office on the backs of a great anti-war movement and actually ended up starting 2 more to boot and getting us even more mired in a quagmire abroad. That's what this entire episode is really all about. It's a shot across the bow at Trump that even trying to get troops out of Afghanistan is beyond the pale for the deep state. And it's a warning to the incoming Biden administration. If you even try, you're next. So you might as well play ball. Be a good boy. I'll end with one of the most fearful observations, which was made by former U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama, Russiagate fanatic, regular guest on MSNBC, Michael McFaul, who tweeted after the Atlantic story came out, quote, "Trump has lost the intelligence community. He has lost the State Department. He has lost the military. How can he continue to serve as our commander-in-chief?" Do you notice anyone missing in that equation about who the president is accountable to? You. And I think that that is a very scary thing for a former U.S. ambassador to tweet, Crystal. And by the way, after I wrote all of this, Trump himself came out and did a press conference last night where he responded to that story and was like, yeah, I think a lot of it are these generals who want to keep war in Afghanistan in order to fund these defense contracting companies.
Yeah.
And CNN lost their mind. So let's throw Glenn Greenwald's tweet up there on the screen. CNN tweets, reporter Ryan Brown, in an unprecedented public attack by a sitting president on the leadership of the U.S. military, Trump has accused leaders of trying to start wars to boost the profits of defense contractors. Glenn Greenwald, yes, perish the thought that the Pentagon might actually be working on behalf. He's like, are you in 3rd grade? And then ends up tweeting out the Dwight D. Eisenhower clip for the so-called unprecedented attack. Look, like I said, did he say it? Maybe. Is it believable? Sure. But
he hasn't done himself any favors in this regard,
has
certainly.
Has not done himself any favors. However, there is a clear motivation here. Mm-hmm. And that is the thing that's just driving me crazy. Like Glenn Greenwald and many others are saying, which is that now you have all of these ads and these things of like generals venerating Biden. I mean, these are the people who got us into the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're the ones who got us in this quagmire in the first place and who refuse and will fight and do everything in their power to make sure that we leave. These are not the people that we should be venerating in American public life.
So, the comments from Trump, this is amazing. This whole thing is amazing. So he said in response, as you were saying, Saagar, I'm not saying the military's in love with me. The soldiers are. The top people in the Pentagon probably aren't, because they want to do nothing but fight wars so that all those wonderful companies that make the bombs and make the planes and make everything else stay happy. True.
Yeah.
Totally true.
Right. But who's the Secretary of Defense?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, and this is the thing that drives me crazy with Trump is like, he's completely right about this. And I watched CNN this morning. They're losing their mind. It's an unprecedented attack. That's the headline of their thing. Trump launches unprecedented attack on military leadership that he appointed. Of course, Glenn points out, oh, by the way, we have heard this before with Eisenhower warned, of course, about the military-industrial complex. But then you turn around and you're like, dude, you almost got us into war in Iran, right? You still haven't gotten us out of Afghanistan, even though you've promised to. And yes, I know people have thrown up roadblocks, whatever. But if you wanted to do it, you certainly ultimately could. And you put the defense contractor dude in charge of the Pentagon. Yeah. So it's not like your hands are clean here.
You can't defend it.
And
it's true.
It's this funny thing. I was thinking about this a lot over the weekend. So part of the Trump appeal and part of why the media feeds into his appeal is because he has all the right people hating him. Like, you look at these people hating, you look at the media hating him, you look at these neocons who got us into all these bad wars and the defense contractors and all these people hating him, you're like, he must be doing something right. Mm-hmm. But it's actually just because they're hating him doesn't actually mean that he's done all the things that he says. It's just there's this personality conflict. And also, I think part of what it is, too, is that he is a symbol of the fact that elite rule is incredibly fragile and tenuous. So even though he's continued a lot of the same policies, I mean, he hired freaking Pompeo and John Bolton, right? So you can't be like, oh, he was way against the neocons.
You can't even say the truth. Even if you don't follow through, you can't even say it. For that, they have to destroy you.
Yes.
They have to destroy you.
Yes, and they cannot take it. So it's such an interesting, like, window into the way that this whole administration has gone. Has Trump actually been the, like, bring our troops home guy? No, not really in reality. He's put a lot of these same cronies in charge. He put even more of these cronies in charge in some respects. But the very fact that he will say this, the very fact that he's unpredictable, the very fact that he is a symbol of the fact that the elite rule is ultimately fragile and people and sick and tired of it, like, they can't take that whatsoever.
Yeah, he's unserious about governance, always has been. My greatest critique of the entire administration. But you're right. I mean, look, here's the thing. He told the truth, and people are losing their minds about it. And this is one of the most clear stories, designed, like I said, not just as a check against Trump, but a check against Biden. Don't forget what Chuck Schumer said in the early days of the administration. Don't piss off the intelligence community because they can leak and destroy you.
Good point.
And this is what they are laying the groundwork. They actually went after Biden in 2009 whenever he was advocating against sending more troops to Afghanistan. They're going to do exactly the same thing whenever it comes down to it.
And by the way, on the original Goldberg story, the longer that it languishes out there, the less plausible it looks. John Bolton himself, who's now, of course, no fan of the president, has come out and been like, this didn't happen. So there you go.
Right.
Two of the nation's final primary races are taking place today, including Rhode Island. Ryan Grim is going to give us an update on the state of the races there when Rising returns.